You find a listing, 5 acres, middle of nowhere, $200 an acre, no utilities, no restrictions, no neighbors within 7 miles. And for a second, just a second, it feels like you broke something, like you clicked one layer too deep into the internet and found a version of life that wasn't supposed to be this cheap. No rent, no noise, no one telling you what to do, just land. So you buy it, or at least you get close. And that's when things start to shift, not dramatically, not in a way that feels like a scam, just small details. You try to drill a well, and someone casually explains that the water under your land doesn't actually belong to you. You look into septic. Turns out you need permits, inspections, licensed engineers. You think, fine, I'll just camp there for a bit. 2 weeks. After that, technically illegal unless you have an approved water source and a permit. You own 5 acres, you just can't really use them. This is that kind of land. Not fake land, not scam listings, real land, real prices, real ownership, with a version of reality attached to it that nobody puts in the photos. 8 places. All of them cheap enough to make you pause. All of them real enough to buy, and all of them come with something you only discover after you start asking the wrong questions. Let's start with the one that shows up everywhere. If you've ever Googled cheap land Colorado, you've already seen it, you just didn't realize it. Costilla County sits in southern Colorado, right along the New Mexico line. High desert, flat land, wide open space that looks exactly like what people imagine when they say, I just want to get away from everything. And the prices? They don't look real. $3,000 per acre is normal, sometimes less. People have bought 5-acre lots here for the price of a used laptop monthly payments, owner financing, $100 down. The listings basically write themselves. And that's not an accident. One county official, Ben Dune, said it pretty directly. If you search cheap land in Colorado, your first 50 results are probably in Costilla County. There's a reason for that. Actually, a few. The land here has been split, and split, and split again. It started as a Mexican land grant, then privatized, then divided into smaller parcels, and then those parcels got divided again. And again. Today there are around 40,000 lots in a county with about 3,500 people, so there are literally more pieces of land than there are humans to use them by a lot. From the outside, it looks like opportunity. From the inside, it starts to look like inventory. Because owning land here is easy. Living on it? That's where things get specific. Let's say you want to build something small, nothing crazy, just a simple off-grid cabin, minimal, clean, efficient. Minimum house size? 600 square feet. Doesn't sound huge until you realize what it removes. No tiny homes, no micro cabins, no, I'll just start small and expand later. You're building a real house from day one. Shipping containers? Not allowed. Pallet builds? No. Tires? Also banned. And these aren't theoretical rules. Someone tried all of this. Enough people tried it that the county had to write it down. Okay, so maybe you don't build right away. You just stay there, temporarily. RV? Sure, but not as a permanent home. Camping? 2 weeks. Then you leave, unless you have an approved septic system, an approved water source, and a permit. So the temporary plan quietly turns into a full infrastructure project. And that's where the cost shows up, not in the land, but in everything required to exist on it. A well runs around $20,000. Septic, another $5,000. Electric line, about $10,000 per mile. Permits, a couple thousand more. And suddenly, your cheap land starts behaving like a full build. But the real constraint isn't the permits, it's water. Because in the San Luis Valley, where Costilla sits, every drop of water already belongs to someone. That's not a metaphor, that's legal. There is no unused water, no hidden reserves, no quiet workaround. At one point, new landowners started filling tanks from a shared artesian well in town, just hauling water out. Locals locked it. One resident, Carlos Martinez, said it plainly. He didn't mind people taking water, just not 1,000 gallons at a time. That's the tension here. Not you can't live like this. More like, you can, but not in the way you thought. And every once in a while, that tension spills over. In 2015, a county meeting about new land use rules turned into a full argument, residents versus officials, sheriff involved. The proposal sounded simple. Install water, septic, and electricity before you're allowed to build anything. The off-grid community pushed back, hard. The county backed off for now. But here's the part almost nobody sees coming. Colorado has a law from 1972, and it quietly controls everything. If your parcel is under 35 acres, it has to meet full subdivision requirements, roads, drainage, sewage, all of it. Which means, sometimes, a small cheap lot comes with more restrictions than a large one. Because you're not just buying land, you're buying everything that was attached to it when it was divided. And none of that shows up in the listing photos. So naturally, people look at Costilla and think, okay, maybe Colorado's just strict. Then they find New Mexico, and the prices drop even more. Luna County, New Mexico. Southwest corner of the state near Deming. Flat desert, huge sky, land as low as $200 per acre. Listings say things like unrestricted, off-grid ready, build whatever you want. And technically, they're not lying. They're just not telling you what actually matters. Because in New Mexico, water doesn't belong to you, not the groundwater, not the streams, not even the rain once you start collecting it at scale. It all belongs to the state. And that changes everything. So here's where Luna County flips the script. In Colorado, the problem was rules. In New Mexico, the problem is ownership, not land ownership water. Because in this state, water is not tied to your property. You can own the land, stand on it, build on it, but the water under your feet is controlled by the state, all of it. Surface water, groundwater, even rain beyond small-scale collection. So you find a parcel flat, dry, cheap enough to feel like a mistake, and you think, I'll drill a well. You can. That part is actually easier than in a lot of states. Domestic well permits in New Mexico are usually granted automatically. But here's the catch. You don't drill it yourself, only licensed contractors. And drilling is just the beginning. Because if you don't want to rely on a well, you need water rights, and that's where things get expensive in a way that feels completely disconnected from the land itself. In parts of New Mexico, water rights have sold for $35,000 to $45,000 per acre foot per year, which means the water can cost more than the land every single year you use it. Now, Luna County isn't the most extreme example, but it operates under the same system, same laws, same structure. So the cheap land, that part is real. The water? That's a separate purchase, even if it's under your property. And then you move to the next step, waste. Because maybe you think, I'll just keep it simple. Composting toilet. No need for a full system. Sounds reasonable. And technically, composting toilets are legal in New Mexico, but not as your only system. You still need septic. So now you have a composting system and a septic system, two separate approvals, two separate inspections for a lifestyle that was supposed to be simple. And nothing happens in parallel. Well, permit one office, septic different department, solar another layer. And here's the detail that quietly slows everything down. You don't even get a physical address until your structure is approved and passes occupancy requirements. No address, no deliveries, no official residency. So even existing on your own land becomes a process. And meanwhile, the bigger picture is shifting. Because Luna County doesn't just have a water issue, it has a water shortage. The city of Deming, the main hub, has been buying farmland, not for agriculture, but for water, specifically for the rights attached to that land, taking farms out of production to secure water for future residents. Between 2007 and 2012, over 100,000 acres of farmland disappeared, and more than 8% of farms were lost. Because water is the limiting factor, not land. Locals call it the real gold, and they're not being poetic. So again, the land is cheap, that's true, but the system around it, that's where the cost lives. Now let's go somewhere that looks like the opposite of the desert. Water everywhere. Forests, lakes, rivers. The Upper Peninsula of Michigan. On paper, this is the dreamland as low as $500 per acre. Access to water, cold climate, but manageable. If you were designing an off-grid map from scratch, this place would make the list. Michigan disagrees. Not loudly, not aggressively, just thoroughly. Because this is one of those states that actually enforces its rules, even in the middle of nowhere, and sometimes especially there. There's a description floating around that the state uses small armies of inspectors and contractors to check compliance, and once you start looking into it, that doesn't feel exaggerated. Here's the one that catches people first. If your land is within 200 feet of a sewer line, you have to connect to it. Doesn't matter if you don't want to, if you prefer off-grid, or if you already have another system. If it's within range, you're using it. And here's where it gets weird. You can apply for a composting toilet, get approved, go through the process, and still be required to connect to sewer. Both systems at the same time, which completely breaks the logic people expect. Because off-grid, in theory, means independence. In practice, sometimes it just means more systems. Then comes water. Wells are allowed, but again, not DIY, only licensed drillers registered with the state. And the geology here doesn't make it cheap hard rock, granite, basalt, which means deeper drilling and specialized equipment. Typical cost? $12,000 to $15,000 just for the well. No pump, no plumbing, no setup inside the house. And then there's the sequencing, because in some counties, like Marquette, you don't get to do things step by step. You apply for well and septic at the same time. You don't get one without the other. And you don't get a building permit until both are approved. And you don't get approval until someone physically comes out, checks the soil, marks the system location, and signs off before anything is built. Start early? Violation. Build first, ask later? Also violation. And that's the pattern here. Not you can't do this. More like, you can, but you're doing it our way. And their way has order, permits, inspections, and licensed professionals, even if your plan was to keep everything simple. Now shift again. Back to cheap land, but this time forest. Aroostook County, northern Maine. Massive, bigger than some entire states. Quiet in a way that feels almost deliberate, and cheap, often under $1,000 per acre, with large wooded parcels and water nearby. Which sounds perfect, until you realize how much of Maine is regulated. There's a law here that covers the entire state, not one county, not one region, all of it, shoreland zoning. If your land is within 250 feet of a lake or river, or within 75 feet of certain streams, you're in a regulated zone. And that zone comes with rules. You can't just build near the water. Setback is at least 100 feet. Cutting trees is controlled. Clear cutting isn't allowed. Roads near water are restricted. Even projects that don't require permits still have to follow all the rules, which means you're regulated even when you're not regulated. And here's the part that matters. Maine has over 6,000 lakes and ponds, so a lot of cheap forest land comes with water nearby, which also means restrictions, even if the listing doesn't say that. And then there's administration. In many parts of Aroostook, you're not dealing with a town, you're dealing with the state, a centralized commission handling zoning for massive areas. That adds time, process, distance. And one more thing people don't expect. Some small towns here don't enforce building codes. Sounds great, until you try to finance anything. Because banks still want to know that what you built meets a code, even if no code technically exists. And that's where things get awkward. Because now you're explaining to a lender that your house is compliant with something that isn't formally enforced. Now let's go back to the desert, but this time, the version people imagine. Nevada. Cheap land, wide open space, almost no rain, and some of the best solar potential in the country. If you were designing an off-grid lifestyle from scratch, this is what it would look like. Counties like Nye, Elko, and Humboldt, with land anywhere from $500 to $2,000 per acre. Minimal building codes in some areas, no one around, no interference. It sounds like freedom. Until you ask one question, how do you get water? And everything slows down. Because Nevada runs on prior appropriation, first come, first served. Whoever claimed water first keeps it. And most of those claims were made a long time ago, 1800s, early 1900s. Which means today, a lot of Nevada's water is already spoken for. Even worse, in many basins, there are more water rights than actual water. On paper, it exists. In reality, not always. So you drill a well. That part might work, but what you're allowed to extract can be limited, sometimes heavily, and in some places, new wells aren't approved at all. So people do what's left. They truck water in, pay for delivery, store it in tanks, and live off that. Technically off-grid, but also completely dependent on a service. And at that point, you start asking a different question, is this actually off-grid or just off-pipe? And then there's zoning. Because not all of Nevada is as loose as it looks. Clark County, Washoe County, even areas that feel rural can fall under strict rules. Minimum lot sizes, limits on structures, restrictions on animals. Sometimes you need 20 acres just to have one house. So again, the land is cheap, the sun is free, but water is the gatekeeper. Now flip everything from dry desert to constant humidity. Florida. Cheap land exists here too, especially in northern and central rural counties. Warm climate, green landscape, year-round growing potential. Sounds easier. Until you try to build. Because Florida doesn't mess around with construction. It can't. Hurricanes, flooding, storm damage, the state has seen enough to know exactly what fails. So the rules are strict, and they're strict for a reason, but that reason doesn't make things cheaper. Alternative builds are difficult earthbag homes. Straw bale, recycled materials all struggle to pass permits because they don't meet hurricane resistance standards. And Florida doesn't compromise on that. Then there's size. In many counties, minimum house size is 1,200 to 1,800 square feet. So your tiny off-grid cabin isn't a house legally, it's an accessory structure. And in most cases, you can't live in it unless there's a bigger, compliant house on the same property. Which means you build the expensive thing first to justify the cheap thing later. And then there are HOAs. More than half of Florida homes fall under them, with rules like no rainwater collection, no visible solar panels, no front yard gardens, no livestock, even in areas that feel rural. Because a lot of rural Florida is still part of planned developments, with restrictions baked into the deed. So the freedom you thought you were buying was already decided before you got there. Now back to the word that shows up everywhere in listings, unrestricted. Texas loves that word, especially in places like Presidio and Brewster counties, where land can be under $1,000 per acre. Unrestricted land sounds like no rules. It doesn't mean that. It just means no known deed restrictions. It does not mean no zoning, no environmental law, or no enforcement. And Texas has a habit of enforcing things later. There have been cases where people built houses, finished them, and were then told to tear them down because of restrictions they didn't know existed, and the courts upheld it. So unrestricted doesn't mean safe. It means do more research. Then there's water. Texas uses groundwater districts, and about 70% of the state falls under them, which means permits for wells, limits on extraction, and spacing rules. And your well can be affected by your neighbor's usage, even if you follow every rule. Surface water isn't yours either. Streams, creeks, lakes are state-controlled, and use beyond basic needs requires permits. And then there's distance. West Texas isn't just remote, it's empty. Medical care is far, hardware stores are far, reliable internet isn't guaranteed. So yes, you get freedom, but you also get isolation. Now, one more place that looks perfect on paper. Eastern Oregon Lake County, Harney County. Land as low as $250 per acre, huge open space, quiet, dry, it feels like Nevada, just softer. And in some ways, it is. Building rules here are more flexible than Western Oregon, so people look at it and think, this might actually work, and then water shows up again. Same system, prior appropriation. Most usable water was claimed a long time ago. You can drill a domestic well, but if you want to grow anything seriously, irrigation becomes a problem, because water rights at that scale are limited or expensive. And then there's wildfire risk. Large parts of Eastern Oregon are classified as fire zones, which means building material requirements, defensible space rules, access road standards. So again, not impossible, just structured. Here's the pattern. None of these places are scams. The land is real, the prices are real, the listings aren't lying. They're just incomplete. Because owning land and living on land are two completely different things. And the gap between them is where all the cost lives. Water, permits, codes, approvals, time. And none of that shows up in a Zillow thumbnail. There's one rule that keeps coming up everywhere. Before you buy anything, call the county. Not after. Not when you're already committed. Before. Ask what you can build, what size, what systems you need first, and in what order. And then ask about water. Because in most of these places, that's the real constraint. Not land. Water. And here's the part that actually matters. People do make this work. There are off-grid communities in Colorado, in New Mexico, in places most people ignore. It's possible, just not in the way the listing makes it look. So if you see something that says unrestricted land, that's not a green light. That's a question. And the more it sounds like freedom, the more you should probably check what it actually means.